Life Camp USA is a nonprofit organization that mentors young men who have lost a father due to military or law enforcement service. Life Camp USA provides an all-expenses-paid, week-long, world-class camp experience that inspires, equips, and navigates these fatherless young men through some of life's toughest moments. Life Camp USA's mentors serve grieving families by helping these sons establish healthy identities, values, character, and goals without the crucial aid of a father in their life. To learn more about Life Camp's mission, visit lifecampusa.org. Again, that's lifecampusa.org.
Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. My name is Steve Sonderman, and I'm going to be your host for today. So grateful that you've taken time out of your week to join us as we continue to talk to speakers, authors, and key thought leaders in the area of ministry to men, in the area of leadership. And this week we have is a real privilege to have one of our speakers for this year's conference, Joby Martin, with us. And Joby is from the Jacksonville, Florida area, Church 1122. And he founded the church a few years ago and has seen just incredible growth. Joby has a real heart for ministry to men. And so as we've done over the past couple of years, we're going to use this podcast as a chance just to get to know him a little bit more. So when he speaks this year, you'll have a little background on who he is and his family, his church, what he does, and what he enjoys to do. And so, Joby, thanks so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Steve.
You bet. So listen, a lot of the guys may not be familiar with you. So why don't we just start by you telling us just a little bit about your background. Love to know about your family and a little bit about your church, your work, any hobbies, just like how you spend your time and what you like to do.
I'm just a nobody willing to tell anybody about somebody that wants to save everybody, right? So I grew up in a little place called Dillon, South Carolina. You probably never heard of it. It's a tiny little tobacco farming community on the way to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And my daddy used to always say the best thing ever come out of Dillon, South Carolina was I-95, and that's a fact. And so we did not grow up in church, but we grew up hunting and fishing and just kind of a good Southern family. And then I got in a little bit of trouble in high school, found myself doing community service hours at a little Baptist retreat center in the middle of Bennettsville, South Carolina. And my JV football coach was the kind of the dean of the camp. And it ran maybe 100 kids a week. And I was like cutting grass and that kind of stuff. And that's where I met Jesus. And I would say at that point, I believed in God like every good Southerner does. Like you believe in Santa Claus and NASCAR and SEC football, it's just kind of a part of the package deal. But the counselors reenacted the crucifixion of Christ, like dressed up in togas and started with Pilate and ended with one of the guys playing the part of Jesus on the cross saying, "It is finished." And then Coach Lee describing that when he pushed up on his nail-pierced feet and says, "It is finished," that counted for you. And it's a Baptist camp, so we had to sing "Just As I Am" about 19 times, And on about the 20th verse, he got up there and he says, "I think there's one more kid that needs to ask Jesus into their heart." That's the language we used back then. And so that kid was me. I got up and confessed Christ as my Savior. And then over the next several years, before I know it, I was at camp as just working. And it's where I preached my first sermon ever. It's where I ever led my first Bible study. It's where Coach Lee kind of voluntold me I was going to go into ministry. And then I did. And so then right after I got out of seminary, I met my wife, Gretchen. We've been married for 23 years. We met up in the Roanoke Valley area. Then we moved to Athens, Georgia, go Dogs. We were there. She was a student there for about 3.5 years. And then we moved to Jacksonville, Florida. And that whole time I was doing youth ministry. And we started a service at the church that I was on staff at. And in about 8 months, the service kind of outgrew the whole church. And so my senior pastor is the best Christian I've ever met in my whole life. And instead of taking that thing over, he just said, you should plant a church and we'll help you do it. And so he let us live at his church for about 2 years while we raised money and renovated an old Walmart. And then we launched the Church of 1122 in 2012. And it's going good. I got 2 kids. I've got a son who's about to be 18, free safety for his high school football team. So I've coached a lot of football. I'm one of the coaches on the sidelines for him. I've got a daughter that's 14. She's a cheerleader. So it's pretty special on Friday nights when we're all on the same field finally. I hunt a lot. I mean, a lot. I write probably 90% of my sermons are written in a tree stand. And I do live in Jacksonville, so there's a lot of good fishing here too. I play a little bit of golf, but only when it's not hunting season. Yeah, man, that's who I am.
All right. Well, yeah, yesterday I spoke actually at a Hunt for Life fundraiser out at a bird farm. And guys, we had about 150 guys there. They were shooting all day, and it was just a great, great day to hear the stories and to see what they were doing. But so anything your favorite type of hunting, or is it just anything that's moving type thing, or birds?
Well, I primarily bow hunt.
Okay.
I was able to kill a really nice, 380-inch elk in Colorado with my bow this year.
Wow.
It's hard to beat that.
Yeah, it is hard to beat.
Practice. It's so funny. I practiced all summer to like 80 to 90 yards in case I had to make a long shot.
Yeah.
That joker fed into 16 yards. I could have stuck him with a spear. I mean, it was a gimme. He was right there and he's huge, and I got to watch him topple over. So that's pretty cool. Like my kids, they, except for restaurants, they've never eaten like store-bought red meat, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hunt all the time.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about your church. What makes it unique, and what type of things are you doing? And
yeah, I don't know what makes us unique. I feel like we sing and talk like everybody else. But God has breathed on it like crazy. We unapologetically teach the Word of God. It's a gospel-centered church. I would say what really describes 1122 is every weekend is like the last night of camp. We sing passionately. We just preach. We mostly just preach books of the Bible. Like right now, we're in the book of Proverbs, talking about landmines that can blow your life up. And then we just call people to action, whether that's prayer or repentance or whatever it is. So, but that's it. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to put a finger on what's happening here. The only way I know how to describe it is the way Jesus described it when he's talking to Nicodemus in John 3.
Yeah.
And he says, look, Nick, the Spirit's like the wind.
Yeah.
Like you don't know where it's coming from, where it's going. It's just blowing, and you better set sail and go with it. That's just kind of what we've done for the last 11 years here at 1122.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think the best thing is when you can't describe it, because that means that it's not about you. It is about God and what he's doing and his favor upon you and the ministry and all the volunteers and staff. Yeah,
probably my favorite thing about our church, we just turned 11, is, we don't have any of these like strategic growth models, or we don't really do any of that. But it has grown. We're in 14 campuses now. About last weekend, we had about 19,000 people live in the buildings. And yet, at the end of the service, we called people to come and pray, and it's 6 rows deep of men and women and students just on their face, just doing work with the Lord. It feels just as real and raw as it did when it started as a service that me and my buddies put together. And even when we did that, we thought, what if we just ran church the way we always wanted to go to church? You know what I mean? And so, so it's going real good. God's been very, very gracious to us.
Well, one of the things I've heard over the years is that you really have a heart for ministry to men and ministering to men. Joby, for you as a senior pastor of 1122, what does that look like? And what does that sort of mean to you? And then how is that played out in your church specifically?
Well, I think it was just intuitive to me from the beginning. Like I said, it was never like a strategy. I mean, now I know all the statistics. If you reach men, you'll reach the family, and
Mhm.
I think even back when I was doing student ministry, I was always trying to just grow leaders. And I knew if I got like the leaders at the high school, then the rest of the kids would follow them. And a bunch of those were some of the athletic guys, some of that kind of stuff. And then as we transition into this church plan, I mean, first of all, I am a man, so I do think you have a tendency to attract who you are. And I do think events are important, like the No Regrets conference, because you have these catalytic moments. Like if you look through the history of Israel, there are these catalytic moments in the life of Israel where God shows up in a supernatural way. And then God tells those men, hey, build an altar right there. And so I think what you're doing is helping build some altars in some dude's life so that when another generation comes along and they go, hey, why are these 12 rocks stacked on each other right here? Then one generation can share with the next generation, let me tell you how God showed up. But those catalytic events are not enough.
Right.
You got to have more than just men's events. You've got to have, I don't even know what the best language is, a man-friendly church, the kind of church that a man would go to. I mean, I can remember being in seminary thinking we're in trouble. Like if these are the men, all the men I know ain't going to follow these people.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying, even though I'm a total redneck from South Carolina, I drive a big truck, I got more guns than I have fingers, my favorite color is camo, I love college football, that doesn't make me a man. It makes me awesome. It does not make me a man. But what makes you a man is being the man God has called you to be. And you can't be a man until you bend your knee to Jesus, period. But to be a man is to be the prophet, priest, servant, king, provider, and protector. To be a man has to do with responsibility. And a part of what has occurred to me as the senior pastor here, lead pastor here, quite honestly, from the empty tomb until today, women have been doing their part. Women have been showing up. They showed up at the tomb when the men were scared. Women have been, I know Jesus is the head of the church. Women have really been like the backbone. Praying mamas is why the church exists. That's how Jesus has used the church over the last 2,000 years. And a part of the reason, though, is I think the church, for at least the last, 50, 60 years or so, has really just been built for women.
Yeah.
I mean, tell me a man that just wants to come in, sing high-pitched songs, wear robes, sit in circles, and talk about your feelings. And quite honestly, I don't know how real and raw you want me to be, most churches' message to men has been, sit down, be nice, be quiet.
Yeah.
And I'm just telling you, when I read my New Testament, you do not have to check your testicles at the door to follow after Jesus. In fact, my Bible says, stand up and act like men. And so we have just challenged men to be men. And even we just take into account men when we plan services, the way I preach, the music that we sing. Now, I get in a little bit of trouble, especially these days, for this analogy, but here's the way I think about it. Here's the way I train church planners and stuff. If I go home and my wife is wearing one of my shirts, she puts on one of my button downs, it looks great. If I put on my shirt, it looks fine. If I put on her shirt, there's a problem. Okay. The church for the last 100 years has been a blouse, and it has fit women fine. And men putting it on, it's something's wrong. Yeah. So what we're trying to do, we are the flannel shirt of churches, knowing that both men and women look good at it and can fit into it.
Yeah.
Now, what's funny is we do some stuff that men love. Like in all of our men's rooms, we got a bunch of deer heads and stuff. And I can't tell you the number of men that say, man, I didn't know if this was my church until I went to pee. And then I saw that nice 10-pointer that you shot in Wisconsin. And I knew this was my church. And I thought, that wasn't so much a strategy as when we first started, we didn't have any money and we were trying to decorate, and so my wife just started going around and getting all my deer mounts and putting them in the bathrooms here just to have some decoration. I was like, we don't need decorations in the men's room. And she was like, we need something. And so, but that wasn't a strategic move. That was just kind of an overflow of me and my buddies that started this church, had a bunch of deer heads. Now we put them all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I do love the illustration. I often tell where I spend the majority of my time is just working with pastors and leaders and helping them understand who men are today. How do you reach them and root them? And I often say that when a man enters the church, they have to become someone they're not. And so it's helping to develop, like you said, a male-friendly church, to develop that culture where a guy feels comfortable to go, and not where he has to be dragged, but rather wants to go and feels challenged. And men want to be challenged.
Yeah, that's it. That's the number one thing, is challenge. So this is a long story, but when I was in high school 100 years ago, and the armed services would come and recruit, that we would do an assembly for the seniors. Remember this? And the armed services would come and recruit. I mean, people would lose their minds today. I don't know how they think we're free, but anyway, I remember. So we're there, however many, 800, 1,000 kids, or whatever. And the Navy guy goes first. And the Navy guy says, listen, you want to be in the Navy because you can travel the world on Uncle Sam's dime. It's awesome. You'll see places, especially you people will never see. The Air Force guy comes up next. He's like, no way. You gone all the time. Be in the Navy. I mean, be in the Air Force. You kind of work 9 to 5, live in an apartment. It's great. The Army guy gets up and he goes, don't do that. You need to be in the Army because we're going to teach you a skill. And when you get out of the Army, you can have a job, make some money, take care of yourself and your family. And they all went over their time. Then the Marine gets up last and he goes, well, I've only got 2 minutes because they talk too long. And then very slowly he looks around the auditorium and he says, but that's okay. There's probably only 2 of you that have what it takes to be a Marine. If you think you're one of those 2, come see me. He's got a line out the door. Nobody's in the other lines.
Yeah.
That's how I preach.
Story. Yeah.
That's how I preach. We do things at our church, like tell people you got 3 years to go on a mission trip or find another church. And they get mad and leave and bring 10 people back with them because we challenge them to do. And we lovingly challenge our men. I'm not just beating them up every week, but they kind of like it, man. I mean, you don't want the football coach that just gives you a hug every time, right? You want the guy that yells at you when you mess up. And so we're just talking to men right where they are, challenging, calling men to not just be the spiritual leader of their house. I think that's been a huge mistake in Christian vernacular. I think some woman in a women's Bible study made that up because the Bible doesn't say he's merely the spiritual leader. He's the head. Spiritual leadership is one of the many things that he is in charge of in his home. Right. He's responsible for everything in his home. And so it doesn't do enough either just to beat guys up on where they're failing, but we're trying to create tools and help men put things in their hands to help them win at home.
Mm-hmm. How many times have you wanted to impact your world for Christ, but struggled to take the first step? Well, you are not alone. Our latest resource, Disciple Maker 101, is designed to help you become a disciple who makes disciples. This self-paced online course will provide you with practical tools to help you identify men in your sphere of influence, equip you to share your faith story, and practical tips to invest in the life of others by leading a small group. To become a disciple maker, visit noregretsmen.org. Again, that's noregretsmen.org, and click on Become a Disciple Maker.
And what have you found helpful for getting men into small groups and connected with one another, where they can get that training, that equipping, the community? What importance is that in your church, Joby?
So it's huge. So they're called disciple groups for us. There's 2 things that I've just done. One time from stage, I just challenged our men because it was like 75% of the people in groups were women.
Yeah.
And I just challenged. I was like, come on, man. Everybody in the country thinks we're like the man church and we're failing. And I get it. We got a lot of stay-at-home moms and they have a lot more time, and I get it. But you have to be in groups. So sometimes it's a straight challenge. Personal invitation is always the best thing ever. Personal invitation is always the best thing. And then we try to constantly put on stage, like especially in testimony videos and things like that, men who are talking about how a disciple group, being around other men, having a band of brothers, changed their life. Also, I've written a couple of books, and I always make sure in the books that I'm writing, even though the 2 that I've written so far aren't like man books, but one of the books I wrote is called Anything is Possible, and it's about 9 miracles of Jesus. And one of the miracles is the lowering of the man through the roof, that gets healed. And so around here, we talk about every man needs 4 friends that can carry one of the corners of their mat.
Yeah.
And so we just preach, repreach it, personal invitation, and then celebrate what God's doing among the men in our church.
Yeah. So they're just hearing it all the time from every direction and wherever they go. Yeah.
Also, short-term missions is a really big deal for us.
Okay.
And one of the things that we found to be very successful is, I mean, men will show up and swing a hammer, man. They'll raise money, they'll get on a plane, they'll go to some third world country, and they will go and pour some concrete. And then the key, though, is on the backside of those mission trips, you try to get people in groups because they've already got this like shared history and commonality and some affinity there. And so everything we're doing here at our church, both for men and women and couples, is trying to point to disciple groups.
Yeah. And I have found the exact same thing, was just the mobilizing of the men, because they want to do something. They don't want to sit around and just be on a committee and push papers around a table. Right. And, but then it was finding trips that were consistent with who they were. So whether that was medical trips or business trips or construction trips, or, there were lots of different ways based on the skills and the talents of the guys to get them out and be involved in something bigger and greater than themselves. So, well, Joby, over your time, you've been doing this now for a number of years. What are some of the benefits for the guy that's listening out there and they go, well, that sounds great, but sort of, so what? What have you seen happen in your church with the men? What are some of the results of your efforts the last number of years?
So all of the data, all of the sociological data is overwhelming that when you reach men with the gospel, women and children flourish. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
If you reach children and women with the gospel, the percent chances of dad coming to Christ is minuscule.
Yeah.
If you reach dad with the gospel, the chances of mom and the kids coming to Christ is overwhelming. And things like poverty is relieved. If we listen, man, if men come to Christ and we solve the fatherlessness crisis in America, we don't have any more problems.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
Almost every nonprofit created is because a man didn't do what he was supposed to do.
Joby, can I ask you this? Because I quote the numbers. I feel like I'm just out there always just talking about this stuff, trying to cast that vision, Why do you think so many people, leaders, ignore those statistics that it makes such a huge difference on the family? And yet there's so many, I know, because I'm working with pastors all the time, that just, they might listen to it, but they act like it's not real. You know what I'm saying?
I do, because the feedback loops that they've created in their life are just full of the women at their church telling them how great they're doing.
Yeah.
It's hard to reach men. Men don't have time. I mean, they're good men are working 50, 60 hours a week.
Yep.
And trying to have some kind of little hobby in their life, and they're running their kids all over the place for every little ball game and stuff. And so it's way harder to reach men. But if you don't, you will lose the family. You just will. And if you don't, you will lose the community. And as you see, you will lose the country. Yeah. And so it requires hard work to go reach hard-headed men. And it is up. If not us, then who?
Right. Exactly. I interrupted you. You were just starting to talk about some of the benefits. One of those being, you're going to reach the family and strengthen the family. You were talking about poverty and stepping into that.
It's also a huge benefit for all of the like single moms and kids growing up with a dad. I mean, listen, there used to be this phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Good gracious. You don't want the village to raise your child today. You have the village idiot. You need a church. Yeah. So where else are children seeing positive male role models and good, godly men? And we work very, very hard to have men volunteer in our kids ministry, in our student ministry. We want strong Christian men all over this church, not with their chest out, beating their chest. Men's ministry is not axe throwing and, BMX, that's not what it is, man. Catalytic events are important. Again, they're very important because it is a thing you can bring your friend to and say, well, this is going to be different. Like the speakers at this conference is going to be different. You're going to want to come to see that. But then they got to have some handles to grab onto in the church. And I mean, the benefits are just incredible. They're just incredible. I mean, the church in the Bible is called a family. If you had a family with just all women and children, that's not a family. That's like a commune or something. That we need men and women and another generation to make up the family of God.
Yeah. Well, Joby, this is, I just really appreciate your time and talking about this, because sometimes I think it's easy to feel like we're out there by ourselves in this battle. And I know that the listeners are going to be so encouraged. There might be, my guess is there might be a pastor or a leader out there who's just sort of like starting to get a little excited about this. And they're going, okay, where do I start? All right. I've been doing church just sort of the normal way, the things I learned in seminary. And I want to reach my men. I want to minister to my men, but what do I do? Joby, can you just give just a couple ideas? Just so here's some things, guys, where you could start to make that paradigm shift in your church.
All right, this is the easiest question you've asked. So oftentimes pastors let what they can't accomplish keep them from a small win that they can. So you're right. Maybe you don't move the needle and maybe you don't change the entire ethos of your church over the next 2 weekends or whatever. But why don't you just start discipling men? Yeah. Just you invite 5 men and just start discipling them. Because what will happen is the moment men start getting discipled, and this is beyond this, a Bible study for sure. There's no way to disciple people without the scriptures. But it's got to be beyond that. It's got to be, how do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength? So you got to talk about what it means to be a disciple mentally, physically, relationally, and spiritually. And you just pick, there's got to be 4 or 5 men in your church, and you can just start and make it public. I am discipling men. And then as those men begin to be raised up, they will begin to find other men. And for a season or 2, you just take personal responsibility and quit waiting on somebody else to do this for you, and you just do it. Over time, as it begins to grow, you can put some systems and structures and leadership around it. And the great news about this is once the momentum starts getting going and other men begin to find out, and the men that help you start this, as they begin to mature, you'll get so much momentum that then you can just make sure the momentum is steered in the right direction. Yeah. But you're the leader. And you can start it. I mean, think, Jesus changed the world with just 12 dudes, just 12. Little Bible study with 12 guys. So if you started with 4 or 5 guys and just said, hey, we're going to meet every other week. We're going to talk about what it means to be a man. We're going to study 1st and 2nd Timothy is where I would start if I was you, just because here's Paul, an older man, putting his hands on a younger man, saying, hey, buddy, you got this. I think a lot of pastors are gripped by fear. And Paul's going to tell Timothy, God didn't give you the spirit of fear. See, fear is a spirit. It's not a feeling. It's not a personality type. It's a spirit that does not come from God. And he's like, look, dude, you don't have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of self-control. And so just as Paul laid his hands on Timothy and commissioned him and anointed him for what God had for him, you could be that for just 4 or 5 guys to start with. And then maybe next semester, you double that. And then before you know it, men in your church are raising up. And then secondly, as you are putting the weekends together, first of all, do you know any men? Like, do you know any other than like other pastors that, you know, whose favorite pastime is to read old dead guys or whatever? And you've got to ask yourself, is this, are there some handles for them to grab onto here? I mean, as like the keys of the songs, can men sing them? The content of the message, does it have anything to do with a grown man's life? Yeah. And if you just did those 2 things, I think it would change everything at your church in regards to reaching men. Yeah, those are great applications, and I couldn't agree more. I know when we started 35 years ago with the guys, I just started 2 small groups, one on Tuesday morning, one on Wednesday morning, and that was it. And I was a full-time men's pastor, one of the first ever. And people were so upset. Why aren't you doing retreats? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? But I just took 12 guys on Tuesday morning, 12 guys on Wednesday morning. We met for a whole year. And
And boy, you just the flack we took. Thank goodness there wasn't email at that time, but or texting. They had to actually write a letter. But yeah, then it just multiplied over the next 30 plus years. And
right.
Like you said, then you can add the structure and some leadership to it and things like that. But I just had to do it myself, and that's something everyone can do. Any pastor can do that. And I love
Amen.
The piece for the
and then when you get it right, your men will just kind of create their own retreats.
Yeah, right.
They will. They'll just say, hey, we're going hunting, we're going fishing, we're going to take a motorcycle trip, and quite honestly, sometimes you don't want like the church's stamp on it. So they can just do what they want to do, and right.
Right. Oh, for sure. And then they're gonna move out into areas, affinity groups that you and I aren't gonna touch, right? Because we have absolutely no connection in with a bunch of doctors or a bunch of lawyers or mechanics or whoever. We're Milwaukee's home of Harley Davidson, so we had the Sons of Thunder, and every Sunday they were out riding their bikes all over Wisconsin and the Midwest. And
I love it.
I don't have a bike, but bunch of guys do, and that's what they do. So
one other thing that's like an old youth pastor trick that I don't feel like most pastors feel like they have the permission to do. There is nothing wrong with you taking some kind of hobby or thing that you have an affinity for and building a little ministry around it. So if you do have a Harley and you want to do a riding group and say a little prayer, and you should do that. Why not? Because Coach Bully, the guy that led me to Christ, his discipleship strategy, of which he did not have one, but he discipled more kids in South Carolina than anybody I've ever known in my life. His discipleship strategy was, get in the truck. He never did anything alone. So he would just drive by and pick a bunch of us up, put us in the truck, and then we'd be cleaning dog kennels, or sometimes we'd be bird hunting, or whatever he did. He just took a bunch of us with him. So one of the things I do, I started doing these hunting trips, and I want to go anyway. So now I just invite 10 or 12 men on these hunting trips, and it's a great time to spend time with men. And so, Pastor, you have permission to do that, to invite some men into some of the parts of your life that you enjoy.
Yeah, that's in my mind, one of the key points is you don't have to do something you don't enjoy. Take what you enjoy, what you love doing, and just add a spiritual touch to it, and just bring some guys with, and let your other staff and other people do it with the things that they enjoy, and you just free people up to do that. So
correct.
Well, listen, I know we could talk for hours on this because we're both pretty passionate about this topic. Before I let you go, how can the listeners, access some of your materials? You said you have a couple books, obviously your sermons. We'll put it in the show notes. But how do they access your stuff, Joby?
There's a bunch of options. I have a website, jobymartin.com. That's where a lot of the book stuff and sermon stuff is. Our church's website is coe22.com for Church of 1122. Okay. And then honestly, if you just Google Joby Martin, all those things kind of pop up. Yeah. And all my sermons are there for free. You can buy books. One's called If the Tomb is Empty. The other one's called Anything is Possible. And I'll have another coming out next year called Run Over by the Grace Train. So, and they're just discipleship materials. It's just,
okay.
I don't write I write books to try to help people know Jesus better. That's what they are.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. Well, listen, thanks again for taking the time to do this. I know you got lots of stuff going, and we're really looking forward to having you as part of the conference this year. We're so excited and just grateful for your ministry and what you're doing and your passion and your heart for everyone, but especially for the men of your church and community. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate you. Thanks for all you guys are doing.
All right. Well, on behalf of Joby and myself, we want to thank you for listening this week. And like we've said before, just make sure you take this and you pass it on. My guess is I know that you have lots of pastors and leaders in your sphere of influence who will be really encouraged by this message today. Some very practical applications on how each one of you can start to minister to the men in your church and in your community. So have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.noregretsmen.org/podcast.
MK Cellular, your local U.S. Cellular authorized agent, is a proud supporter of No Regrets Men's Ministry. Find our locations at mkcellular.com.